failed Africa. They rely on flawed models, distorted and outdated assumptions, and systemic bias, painting an unfair picture of our economies and leading to distorted ratings, exaggerated risks, and unjustifiably high borrowing costs. Let me say this again. Global credit rating agencies have let us down. They continue to rely on very flawed models and the whole system is also biased. The result is that they paint a very unfair picture of our economies, and this has devastating effects because it leads to distorted ratings of what the situation really is. And it also leads to exaggerated risk of our countries and our continent. And obviously, that leads to very high borrowing costs. These prejudice assessments come at an enormous cost to Africa. They deter investment, distort global trade, and derail progress towards sustainable development goals. By misjudging Africa, these agencies deny opportunities to investors and economies and deprive nations of prosperity. The numbers tell a damning story. The Africa Peer Review Mechanism and the United Nations Development Programme place the cost of biased credit rating at a staggering $75 billion in lost opportunities. In a continent abundant with natural wealth, vast arable land, billions in diaspora remittances, and the world's largest carbon sinks, credit rating agencies have delivered 94% of all downgrades in the past decade, while arbitrarily designating only 2 African nations as investment grade. We must be bold and call this for what it is: a financial straitjacket imposed on Africa. A system that punishes our economies while rewarding others, even when the fundamentals are comparable, in some cases even better. Excellencies, the foundations of global finance are supposed to be anchored on principles of fairness, transparency, and merit. Yet, these principles are disregarded when it applies to Africa. Africa will no longer accept to be misjudged by scales that overlook our reality. The winds of change are blowing, and our march forward is as unstoppable as it is relentless. An African credit rating agency is not just an alternative. It is, in my opinion, an imperative. This agency must be globally credible and backed by rigorous, credible data and driven by high reporting standards. But more importantly, it must reflect Africa's reality correctly. We will not walk this journey alone. We will build alliances east, west, and north, grounded in shared values of dignity, equity, and progress. We will hold rating agencies to account and demand accurate standards. We will leverage the experience and expertise of Pan-African credit rating, strengthening their capabilities and expanding their reach. The potential impact is profound. Research shows that a one-level improvement in Africa's average credit rating would unlock US $15 billion in additional funding. This alone would outstrip official development assistance and meet some of the critical aspects of Africa's infrastructure needs. The opportunity is within our grasp, and we must seize it. I want to emphasize that this agency will complement international credit rating agencies by filling in data and analytical gaps. In other words, it will do the heavy lifting that international rating agencies may lack the time, inclination, or capacity to undertake. I see the role of Africa credit rating agencies as one of demystifying and democratizing sovereign credit assessments. It must develop a methodology that is objective, transparent, and replicable, rooted in the rigor of science rather than the exclusivity of tradecraft. Let me commend the United Nations Development Programme and AfriCatalyst for stepping forward to support African nations in strengthening their credit worthiness. This is the kind of partnership that we need, rooted in action. I leave you with the words of African Development Bank President Akiwumi Adesina, and I quote, "The perception of risk is not the reality of risk. Wrong always give wrong weights." End of quote. It is time for Africa to use the right scales, one that reflects its true weight. The African Credit Rating Agency will do just that. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, on your call for Africa to rewrite its history and an unfair rating system, which costs about $75 billion annually, as indicated in your speech. We move on, and now you have the floor, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Let me just acknowledge my colleagues that I'm seated with on the table, President of Algeria, President of Ethiopia, President of Kenya, and my other colleagues, but also others, Excellency, heads of organizations, business that are in the House today. Let me start by acknowledging and thanking the African peer review mechanism, our own mechanism, the African Union Commission, the Economic Commission for Africa, for basically coming together to pursue or to walk this path of setting up the African Credit Rating Agency. I do remember standing here together with President Ruto, then President Nana, I think last year, and deliberated on a number of issues, but that included this particular and very important issue. I just want to put context to what is obvious, and my colleagues have already said those issues. Africa, let's not be shy about it, has not been treated fairly in a global business, economy, business, finance, hence the need for us to speak for ourselves, to redress this imbalance that has been going on for a long time. the critical need to reform the global financial architecture. We've been talking about it for too long. We need to take practical steps to redressing this. After our AU meeting here and the side meeting right here last year, we moved on to Paris later in the year, and we had a specific session there chaired by President Macron around the reform of the global financial architecture. We made our points very clear. And I think it is now time that we in this hall and those that are not present at a political level say and commit and walk the talk that we will realize the creation or implementation of the African credit rating agency. We have talked enough. We know the cost that has been occasioned to our economies around the price of capital, long-term capital, but talk about short-term capital. It's crippling. If you look at the cost of short-term capital, it's crippling. It's damaging even to viable businesses. Let's say other things are equal, ceteris paribus, other things being equal, and the only thing you are left to assess the viability of the project is the cost of capital. Many a time, that project will not see because that variable called the cost of capital is too high. Compare that project on our continent with another project in a different continent. That project will pass the test, and it will contribute to growth of that economy. Whereas in Africa, that project has failed on account of the cost of capital. We don't need to illustrate that point even further. It is clear that one of the issues that keeping Africa's economies down is this animal called the cost of capital. I think we need to deal with it. And the way we are dealing with it, today, progressing the implementation, actualization of the African Credit Rating Agency, so we can address that one variable, if it's the only challenge that is outstanding, to tick the box for us to make that investment, public or private. And I'm focusing here not on consumption expenditure. I'm focusing on investment expenditure, projects that will lead to growth of our economies. And not just growth, but accelerated growth, so we can create jobs for our population on the continent. Number one. Number two, so we can create business opportunities in the supply chain for public sector, private sector, micro, small, medium, large businesses. I think these are the issues we must be conscious of as to what is the motivation which has brought us to this breakfast meeting. That is the motivation. So, number three, one, I said jobs. Two, business opportunities. Three, to enhance our treasury revenues. For what purpose? So we can make investments that only require or are better made by public sector institutions, which will lead to more growth. In Zambia, we say our focus now is growth, growth, and more growth. We were decapitated by one drought, waste in living memory. But yet, if we had made the right investments, for example, in irrigation, we will still have had produced enough food, not just for ourselves, but for others in the region, on the continent. We will still have generated enough electricity, since we were 80% green but mono because of hydro. So we do need the investments in our countries, on our continent. Before we came in here, we were having a conversation with us out there, and we said, we on this continent must be expansionary in mind, must not be driven by when we are dreaming of bigger projects. And this is coming back to credit. This project is too big for Africa. What is the meaning of that? Post the Second World War, to grow their economies in a phenomenal way. And they did that. And they took risks. But when we want to take risks, we're inhibited by, one, that our economies are too small. But if our economies are too small, that we can only do that through growth. And to grow, we need more investments. We need to be more ambitious. We were in Tanzania not long ago, Dar es Salaam, on the agenda of providing electricity to, and we transmission. So you can evacuate power from the generating point to the consumption point or demand point. These are huge projects. Let me put context for my sins. Electricity is not sold like sweets. Generally, electricity is sold on longer-term agreements, power purchase agreements. Let's typify the situation. Tanzania has Zambia had shortage of power because of a drought. But Tanzania could not move power from its generating sources to Zambia because there was no interconnector. There was no transmission. We also talked about a one electricity market, Africa electricity market, isn't it? Yes, we invest in generation, big project. 2, transmission, big projects. So now, since power is sold long term, 5, 10 years, 15 years, and the price is embedded in the power purchase agreements, but you still have problems on our continent to raise capital to fund generation, transmission, even when the demand is there. Let's reflect on that. For us, we have a target to grow our copper production to 3 million tons from 700,000 something. This year, we believe we'll break the psychological mark of 1 million tons. Never done before in our country. We have mines, quality investments that need the power and are ready to sign the power purchase agreement. How is it that a credit rating agency would give us a low rating in Tanzania, in Zambia, which constrains our ability to raise fairly priced capital, to invest in generation and transmission, and the demand is there, and the capability to pay, effective demand. I'm not talking about potential demand. I'm talking about effective demand, ability to pay. You see the distortion. Because someone in Hong Kong is sitting, a young person is sitting and rating us poorly, and the credit provider thinks that there's a higher risk to invest in our country, in our region. But the truth on the ground, this is a project that should actually attract a lower cost of that, very low. So who is that one telling us that we're not credit worthy? We have the demand, we have the capability to actually develop the project. I hope we now see what we're dealing with here. As is being equal, we need to address the credit risk rating has gone for too long. I thought that would be my message today as I stand here. And lastly, just to say to you, when we've dealt with this matter properly, we have a credible Africa credit rating agency, professional, private sector driven, competent, one that can stand shoulder to shoulder with Standard & Poor's, with Fitch, reflect on how they've been rating Africa for far too long, because the bare facts will be in their hands, unlike picking information from the open source, as the President of Ethiopia said in our side conversation. I thought, ladies and gentlemen, I would put context to our discussion. So my closing remark is to say this thing must be operationalized yesterday.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your call that we must act with speed to operationalize the African credit rating, so increase our investments to improve the welfare of our people. The opening statement is the President of the Republic of Algeria, who is also the chairperson of the review forum of heads of state and government. You have the floor, Your Excellency.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فخامة الرئيس السيد محمد ولد الشيخ الغزواني، رئيس الجمهورية الإسلامية لموريتانيا ورئيس الاتحاد الإفريقي، أصحاب الفخامة والمعالي، رؤساء دول وحكومات دول أعضاء في الآلية الإفريقية، معالي السيد موسى فاتي رئيس مفوضية الاتحاد، سادة والسيدات رؤساء ومسؤولو المؤسسات المالية والمصرفية الإفريقية، السيدات والسادة ممثلو القطاع الخاص الإفريقي، الضيوف الكرام، السيدات والسادة، أنا بودي أن لا أقرأ الخطاب الذي كان جاهزا، سأتكلم مثل أشقائي الرؤساء الذين سبقوني، سأتكلم من القلب من الصميم. نحن فخورين بإنشاء هذه الوكالة، وأنا سببا في إنشاء هذه الآلية للتقييم l'agence de notation، لأننا واثقون بأن إفريقيا مع أشقائي الذين سبقوني أن وكالة التنقيط لازم نعمل كلنا أن نجعل لها مصداقية، لأن بدون مصداقية ما تكونش لها فعالية، أن نبتعد عن الغير علمي، الغير المنطقي والغير الاقتصادي. وبالتالي أعتقد بدون أن أطول عليكم أن وكالة التنقيط هاتي أنها ستكون لها الإيجابية الكاملة بالنسبة للدول. تكلم فخامة الرئيس عن إمكانيات الكهرباء، تكلم عن إمكانيات ربما تنمية الفلاحة للتغذية كاملة لكل إفريقيا. كل هذا ممكن، كل هذا ممكن لو رجعنا إلى أنفسنا قبل أن يقيمنا الآخر، وهذا ممكن جدا. لهذه الوكالة، وستجدون في الجزائر مناضلا أخا لإفريقيا ولنجاح إفريقيا.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you very much. The interpretation services were not working very well, but the text is going to be circulated. We apologize for this development, but the key issue is that Africa is the future. We listen to that message, Your Excellency, and indeed we are going to leverage that future. At this stage, there's going to be a video clip which is going to be shown, and when the video clip has been shown, I'm going to hand over to my colleagues who is going to continue the moderation. So could we have the video? Thank you very much.